The snow had started earlier than forecasted, soft, scattered flakes drifting from a sky the color of steel. Evelyn Carter didn't worry at first. Winters on the reservation always came fast, always came hard. But she'd lived here long enough to know when to rush home and when she still had time to spare. That afternoon, she stayed late. Her last student, a shy boy named Mateo, had lingered after class to ask for help with a reading assignment. Evelyn couldn't say no. She never could. She loved the children more than the paycheck, more than the comfort she'd given up to work in such a remote place. So she stayed, going over the story sentence by sentence, aware of the light fading but unwilling to cut him short. When he finally left with a small, proud smile, the sky had already turned a threatening gray dot. By the time she locked the school's front doors, the air had shifted. A heavy wind rolled across the open land, hurling needles of snow that stung her cheeks as she hurried to her truck. The engine sputtered to life, groaning as though it already understood what was coming. The first 20 minutes of the drive were manageable. But then the storm descended with the force of something alive, something ancient and furious. Snow thickened into a white wall. The road vanished beneath swirling drifts. The world outside her windshield turned into a shapeless blur. Evelyn tightened her grip on the steering wheel. "Just a few more miles," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it. The heater fought against the cold, losing ground every minute. "I shouldn't have stayed so late," she scolded herself. Even the truck seemed to shudder in agreement. Then came the skid. A sudden gust slammed against the side of the vehicle, spinning her wheels across the snow-slick road. Evelyn gasped, fighting the steering wheel, but momentum had already claimed control. The world tilted. The truck slid sideways, then dipped sharply as it left the road and dropped into a ditch with a bone-jarring thud. Silence fell thick. Cold, absolute. Evelyn sat still, heart racing. Her breath fogged the cabin. She tried the ignition once, twice, nothing. The engine was dead. The temperature inside the truck dropped with startling speed. Within minutes, the air bit at her fingertips. Panic whispered at the back of her mind, "You can't stay here." Not all night. She wrapped herself in her coat, rubbing her arms, forcing herself to think. The nearest ranch was miles away. Cell service here flickered like a candle flame. Most nights, it died entirely. She checked her phone anyway. No signal. Outside, the storm howled a living thing, slashing across the plains with teeth of ice. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. "Please," she whispered to no one in particular, "just let someone come by." But no headlights appeared. No tires crunched through snow. The reservation roads were quiet on the best of days, and this storm was far from the best. Minutes passed. Then longer ones. Her toes numbed. Her fingers stiffened. A bone-deep chill crawled through her layers and settled inside her. She tried to stay awake by talking to herself, by singing, by thinking of warm things, a crackling fireplace, thick blankets, her mother's kitchen in summertime. But warmth felt like a distant memory. The storm pressed closer. Its voice seeped through the glass. Her eyelids grew heavy. "Just a moment," she told herself. Just rest a moment. But the moment stretched. The wind faded. Everything softened into a quiet white haze. Then, faintly, she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. HOOFBEATS. Slow. Steady. Purposeful. At first, she thought she was imagining it, the way freezing minds hallucinate salvation. But the rhythm grew louder, sharper. Something dark moved through the blowing snow, tall and resolute, a horse, and on its back a man. He stopped beside her truck, the horse snorting clouds into the frozen air. The man swung down in one fluid motion, boots crunching through the drift as he approached her window. He wiped the frost from the glass, and for a moment Evelyn couldn't breathe, not from fear, but from the surreal sight of a face she recognized instantly, Chayton Silverhawk, the billionaire rancher. The quiet Apache landowner who rarely spoke, rarely appeared, and never involved himself with anyone. Until now. He opened her door without a word, and the warmth of his presence solid, steady, felt like the first breath of spring. "You're freezing," he said, voice low, calm. "I've got you." And Evelyn, too cold to speak, let herself believe him. The air outside the truck struck Evelyn like a slap. The cold was sharper now, wicked, almost personal. She staggered when Chayton lifted her from the seat, her numb legs refusing to obey. For a moment the world tilted and dimmed, but his arm slid around her waist in a single instinctive motion, steadying her before she could fall. "Easy," he murmured. His voice had a grounding weight, like warm earth after a long freeze. Evelyn blinked up at him, barely recognizing the man she'd only ever seen from a distance, usually on horseback, usually alone, usually with a silence that warned the world not to come close. Tonight he had come close. Close enough that she could feel heat radiating from him even through her layers. Chayton wrapped his heavy wool coat around her shoulders, pulling it tight across her front until she was swallowed by its weight. It smelled faintly of cedar smoke and cold leather, clean, steady, reassuring. The warmth hit her in waves, chasing away the worst of the numbness. She tried to speak, but her jaw trembled too violently. "Don't talk." His tone wasn't unkind. It was simply factual, efficient. "We need to get you warm." The storm screamed around them, flinging sharp flurries that stung her cheeks. Chayton guided her toward his horse, keeping her tucked against him like she was something fragile. He refused to let the wind take. The horse, a massive black gelding, stamped impatiently, but lowered his head as Chayton approached, obedient, trusting. Evelyn could barely feel her fingers as he lifted her effortlessly into the saddle, settling her in front where she could lean against the horse's powerful neck. Then he mounted, behind her. The moment he settled, Evelyn felt his chest a solid wall of heat pressing gently against her back, his arms bracketing her as he took the reins. His coat, still wrapped around her, fell open enough that his warmth soaked through the layers between them. It was the closest she had ever been to anyone in years. But the storm devoured all embarrassment. Survival stripped everything down to instinct. Chayton clicked his tongue, and the horse surged forward into the white madness. The world trembled with cold. Wind hammered against them, snow swirling so thick she couldn't see more than a foot ahead. She buried her face into the horse's mane, trying to shield herself. Chayton lowered his head beside hers, his cheek brushing her temple as he spoke. "Stay awake," he instructed, his breath warm against her skin. "You fall asleep out here, you don't wake up." She swallowed, forcing her eyes open. The warmth of him, his breath, his body, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her back kept her conscious more effectively than fear could. How did you find me?" she managed to whisper. "Tracks," he said. "Fresh ones." Snow had nearly buried them, but apparently not enough to evade a man who'd grown up reading every mark the land offered. Evelyn tried to picture it her. Tire marks swallowed by white, her fading prints leading to a stranded truck, and a lone rider following them through a blizzard that could break. A grown man. Why? Why would he risk that? "You shouldn't have come out in this," she said weakly. "You shouldn't have either." She might have laughed if her teeth weren't chattering. "I didn't think it would get this bad. No one ever does." His arms tightened slightly around her as the horse climbed a small ridge. "But storms don't care what we think." Minutes blurred. Maybe hours. Evelyn's mind drifted, the cold trying again and again to drag her under. Each time she wavered, Chayton gave her a small jolt back to the present, a word. A squeeze of his hand on the reins, the rumble of his voice. Almost there. She lifted her head, Through the raging white curtain, a shape appeared, a cabin tucked against a rise, smoke curling faintly from its chimney. Warmth, shelter, life. Her breath hitched in relief. Chayton slid down first, then lifted her from the saddle. Her legs buckled, but he swept her up easily, cradling her against his chest. The contrast between the cold storm and his solid warmth was overwhelming. It made her shiver harder. "Hold on," he murmured. She clung weakly to his coat as he carried her toward the door, his stride sure despite the snow piling around them. Inside, a burst of heat wrapped around her as he kicked the door shut behind them. She didn't know it yet, but this cabin, this moment, this quiet rescue, would change everything that came after. The warmth struck Evelyn like a wave, so sudden, so complete, that for a breath she felt dizzy. Chayton didn't pause. He shifted her weight in his arms and carried her deeper into the cabin, past the wooden door that had slammed shut behind them with a protective finality. The room smelled faintly of pine, smoke, and leather. Fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. It was a simple cabin, but everything inside it was built to withstand winters far harsher than this one. Heavy beams crossed the ceiling. Sturdy hand-carved furniture stood against the walls. A thick rug covered the wooden floor, its pattern woven in deep reds and browns. Chayton knelt beside the fire and set Evelyn gently onto a low bench covered with a wool blanket. She shivered so violently that her teeth clicked. Her fingers, stiff and aching, struggled to loosen her seatbelt coat. "Don't," Chayton said quietly. "You're frozen through." "Let me." The words should have felt intrusive. Instead, they felt steadying, like someone handing her solid ground after hours of fighting the storm. He worked carefully, removing her gloves first. Her hands were pale, almost translucent, trembling uncontrollably. He held them close to the fire, rubbing warmth into them with slow, deliberate strokes. His touch was warm, too warm compared to her icy skin, and the stark contrast sent pins and needles skittering through her fingers. Evelyn winced. "I know," he murmured. "It hurts when the feeling comes back. Just breathe." He kept his hands over hers, patient as the color returned. No rush, no panic. Just a calm presence that made the storm outside feel like a distant nightmare. When her hands were warm enough, he removed her coat and scarf, then draped a thick woven blanket around her shoulders. She pulled it tight, grateful for the softness and the heat seeping slowly into her bones. Chayton rose to his feet and crossed the cabin. She heard the thump of boots coming off, the rustle of him hanging his coat, the metallic clink of something being placed by the door. When he returned, he carried a second blanket, an even heavier one, and wrapped it around her legs, tucking it gently beneath her knees as though she might break if handled roughly. "You're shaking less," he observed. "That's because I can finally feel my toes again," she said, attempting a weak smile, but she faltered when she looked up at him. In the firelight, Chayton Silverhawk did not look like the intimidating billionaire rancher whose stern profile had graced newspaper articles and business reports. Here, with his long hair damp from the snow and his features softened by flickering orange light, he looked human. Strong, yes. Rugged, absolutely. But also unexpectedly tender. His eyes dark and steady-held. A warmth that she hadn't expected to find in a man who lived his life with such deliberate distance. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me." He shrugged one shoulder, though the gesture was more modest than dismissive. Anyone would have done the same. She almost laughed. Anyone? Out in a blizzard this wild? On a horse? At night? He was being humble, but the truth sat plain in front of her. Few people would have risked it. Chayton moved to the small kitchen space on the far side of the cabin. "You need something hot in you. Tea first, then food." She watched him fill a kettle from a jug and set it over the fire. He moved with a quiet efficiency, everything he did precise and thoughtful, as though tending to a freezing stranger was something he'd done many times before. But she felt, somehow, that it wasn't. "Do you live here full-time?" she asked softly. He paused, glancing at her over his shoulder. "Sometimes. When I need space." She nodded. Everyone in town knew he kept to himself. They just never knew why. He returned to sit beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. She shifted, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. When another shiver ran through her, he leaned forward slightly, concern flickering across his face. "You're still cold." "I'll be okay," she whispered. "You've already done so much." He reached for another blanket but then hesitated. Instead, he allowed his hand to lightly touch her forearm, careful, gentle, grounding. "You scared me out there," he said quietly. The admission startled her. "You were scared?" His gaze held hers, steady and unshielded for the first time. "You were fading fast." "And losing someone in a storm?" He swallowed, jaw tightening. "It stays with you." A silence settled between them, soft, warm and strangely intimate. The cabin crackled. The fire warmed the air, and for the first time since she'd left the school that afternoon, Evelyn felt truly safe. And yet, beneath that safety, something new hummed softly in the space between them, small, fragile, but impossible to ignore. By the time Evelyn's hands and feet had finally regained some warmth, the storm outside had not lessened much, but inside the cabin, the world had contracted to the firelight and the quiet hum of life within these four walls. Chayton moved around with a casual authority, arranging logs in the hearth, fetching another blanket, and preparing a simple meal of broth and bread. Every motion he made was deliberate, unhurried, but also instinctively protective of her, as though the mere act of tending to her warmed more than just her body. Evelyn watched him from where she sat, her body still wrapped in layers of blankets. She had read about him in the local papers. Of course, the enigmatic billionaire who owned acres of land and a series of energy ventures, the man who rarely granted interviews and even more rarely appeared in town. People whispered that he was reclusive, secretive, even unapproachable. But the man before her was entirely different. He was quiet, yes, but he spoke when it mattered. His gestures were measured but caring. There was a presence about him, a weight that seemed both formidable and gentle at once. "Why do you live out here alone?" Evelyn asked quietly, careful not to let her curiosity sound intrusive. She hadn't intended to ask, but the question slipped out, and Chayton didn't seem offended. He paused mid-step, glancing toward her with a faint, contemplative expression. "It's simpler here. The land doesn't care who you are, what money you have, or what mistakes you've made. It only demands respect." He laid a thick log on the fire, letting the flames catch, their light reflecting in his dark eyes. "Out there, everything is out of reach. Out here, you're responsible for yourself and for what matters." Evelyn nodded slowly, understanding more than she expected. It explained a lot about the man people had called distant, about the solitary nature of his existence. The firelight danced across his rugged features, softening the sharpness that so many others might have feared. Here, he was not the billionaire everyone speculated about. He was a man with the same vulnerabilities and needs as anyone else, but shaped by a life of wealth, expectation, and apparently isolation. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked, almost too softly to hear, afraid that even asking might shatter the fragile peace between them. Chayton didn't answer immediately. He set down the kettle, then leaned against the wooden counter, eyes tracing the flickering flames. "Sometimes," he admitted finally, "but I've learned to keep my distance. People get close, and they expect things. They don't understand this life." His voice lowered, almost a whisper. "It's easier to be alone." Evelyn studied him, realizing that the world outside this cabin had judged him by headlines and speculation, without ever seeing the man who quietly built a life on his own terms. The contrast between the public image and this private self fascinated her. She had expected arrogance, perhaps coldness, but what she found was humility, strength, and care. "You've done so much for me tonight," she said, her voice catching slightly. "I don't even know your name." He offered a faint, wry smile, rare and almost shy in the firelight. "Chayton. Chayton Silverhawk." He let the name linger in the warm air. "But I think you know enough for tonight." The words carried weight. It wasn't a boast, nor an attempt to impress. It was simply the truth. And in that moment, Evelyn realized she was seeing him, not the billionaire, not the public persona, but the man behind the name, shaped by heritage, experience, and the weight of responsibility that even money could not erase. Chayton returned to her side, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. The aroma of herbs filled the cabin, subtle and calming. He handed her one, watching her hands tremble slightly as she accepted it. She sipped carefully, letting the warmth spread through her. Realizing that it was more than just the tea, it was the thoughtfulness behind the gesture, the care in the way he moved, the patience he extended without question or expectation. "You've got a remarkable ability to scare yourself out there," he said, his tone teasing but gentle. "I've been riding through worse storms, but I haven't had anyone like you making me chase through it." Evelyn felt a faint blush. "I didn't mean to." She started. "You didn't," he interrupted lightly. "But it happened. And now you're here, safe, warm, alive." His gaze softened as he added, "That's what matters." For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside, Evelyn felt something rare, a sense of understanding, of recognition that she hadn't known she was missing. Chayton Silverhawk was not the man everyone feared, the one cloaked in wealth and rumors. He was human. He was real. And in this cabin, in the quiet glow of firelight, she was beginning to see him and perhaps, for the first time, allowing herself to feel seen as well. Something unspoken passed between them, a quiet acknowledgement of trust, of mutual respect, and of a connection neither had expected. Evelyn realized that tea. The fire flickered low, casting soft shadows that danced across the cabin walls. Outside, the blizzard still raged, relentless and unforgiving, but inside, the world had shrunk to the golden warmth and quiet companionship that Chayton and Evelyn shared. She leaned back against the thick blanket he had draped over her shoulders, sipping her tea, feeling its warmth seep slowly into her body. Each sip was a small comfort, but it was the calm presence of the man beside her that brought a sense of safety she hadn't felt in years. For a long while neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was something else entirely, a shared understanding, a mutual acknowledgement of the night's events, of survival, and of the rare chance that had brought them together. Evelyn's fingers traced idle patterns on the edge of her blanket, her gaze shifting to Chayton. He sat nearby, relaxed but alert, eyes occasionally glancing toward her as if checking that she was indeed safe. There was a careful precision in his movements, a patience that surprised her. She realized that, for someone the world considered untouchable, he was profoundly present. Finally, she broke the quiet. "Do you ever get tired of it?" she asked softly, nodding toward the world beyond the cabin, her town, the reservation, the expectations of people, and the endless chatter of society that chased him even if he avoided it. Chayton tilted his head, considering her question. "Of what?" he asked. "Of everything. The wealth, the people, the noise. Do you ever wish it could all disappear?" Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the vulnerability she didn't usually allow herself to show. He studied the fire for a moment, then met her gaze. "Every day," he admitted quietly, "people think wealth means freedom. But it doesn't. It comes with its own chains. I can move through the world without interference, yes, but I've learned that freedom is complicated. It's easier to find peace where no one is watching." Evelyn nodded, understanding more than she expected. Her own life was constrained in different ways: expectations, duties, responsibilities, but she recognized the same longing in him. The yearning to be unguarded, unobserved, and truly at ease. For the first time, she saw the human beneath the public image, the weight behind the carefully maintained distance he carried. "I stayed to teach," she said quietly, feeling a strange need to share. "Some people think it's foolish to live out here, to devote yourself to children who have little chance of leaving this place. But it matters to me. Every small victory, every moment when a child understands something for the first time, it makes all the hardships worth it." Chayton listened, his eyes never leaving hers. "That's brave," he said finally. "Few people would dedicate themselves to something so intangible, but you're willing to risk a lot for it." "I suppose I am," she admitted, "but it's different from you. You have everything handed to you. You can leave this place whenever you want." He shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. "Maybe in theory, but it doesn't work that way. Responsibility follows wealth. Legacy follows wealth. I inherited more than land. I inherited expectations, scrutiny, pressure that I can't escape." Evelyn studied him, realizing that the man who seemed so invincible on paper was deeply human in reality. There was a vulnerability in his admission, a rare honesty that she felt privileged to witness. It made the warmth of the cabin feel even more profound, as though it wasn't just fire keeping her safe, it was his presence, his openness, his willingness to let her in. The conversation lulled, replaced by the quiet crackle of the fire. Then, tentatively, he asked, "Do you want to hear a story? Something my grandfather told me when I was a boy?" Evelyn's lips curved into a faint smile. "I'd like that." Chayton leaned back, eyes glimmering in the firelight. "He used to say that the land remembers everything, the people who walk upon it, the choices they make, the love they give and take. It's patient. It waits. It rewards honesty, courage, and respect. And it punishes the opposite, I think. I think that's why I've come to respect this place more than anything else. It never lies." Evelyn listened, captivated, as the firelight reflected in his dark eyes. For the first time, the fear, the cold, and the exhaustion of the day melted entirely. She felt herself relaxing, letting go of the tension that had gripped her since the truck went off the road. Here, in the firelit cabin, listening to Chayton speak, she felt something she hadn't in a long time, a sense of belonging. Hours passed unnoticed. The storm outside raged, but inside, stories flowed of ancestors, of lessons learned, of quiet triumphs and regrets. Laughter even slipped through the moments, soft and rare, but genuine. The night stretched, intimate and unbroken, weaving a tapestry of trust between them. Evelyn realized that she wasn't merely a guest in his cabin. She was a witness to a rare and unguarded side of Chayton Silverhawk. And in that firelit warmth, with the storm keeping the world at bay, the beginning of something new, something fragile, powerful, and entirely unexpected began to grow. By now, the storm outside had become a dull roar, like a distant threat that could no longer reach them. Inside the cabin, the fire burned lower, glowing softly and casting gentle shadows across the walls. Evelyn sat wrapped in the blankets Chayton had provided, her hands cupped around the mug of tea he had set in her lap. Each sip sent a wave of heat through her body, but it was nothing compared to the warmth radiating from his presence. He sat close, just on the other side of the hearth, methodically arranging more firewood for the embers to catch. His movements were deliberate, calm, almost ritualistic, but the glance he gave her from time to time held a quiet intensity she could not ignore. Evelyn shifted slightly, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. She could feel the lingering chill in her bones, a residual tremor from hours of freezing wind and snow. Chayton noticed immediately. Without a word, he leaned slightly closer, placing a hand over hers in a gesture so simple it might have been unnoticed by anyone else, but to her it was electrifying. She froze, not because she was uncomfortable, but because it was unexpected. His touch was warm, steady, grounding, a sharp contrast to the shivering tremors of her body. It was the kind of touch that said, without words, that he was there, that she was safe, and that none of the world outside mattered at that moment. Her breath caught, and she realized she had been unconsciously holding hers. "You're still cold," he said quietly, his thumb brushing lightly over the back of her hand. It wasn't an intimate gesture in a romantic sense. It was care, genuine. Concern, but the subtle intimacy of it sent a thrill she didn't understand. I'm fine," she stammered, though the warmth from his hand spread through her in more ways than one. Her cheeks heated, not from the cold, but from the awareness of his proximity, the strength of his presence. Chayton didn't withdraw. Instead, he adjusted the blanket around her knees, tucking it gently as if she were fragile china. "You've been through a lot," he said softly. "It's okay to let someone else take care of you for a while." Evelyn swallowed, realizing that the idea was almost foreign to her. She had spent years relying on herself, solving problems, keeping herself composed, even when fear and exhaustion gnawed at her. And yet, here she was, allowing herself to lean on this man she barely knew but already trusted. There was no pressure, no expectation, just a steady, reassuring presence that demanded nothing but acceptance. Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire, "for everything, for finding me, for this." Chayton's gaze met hers, dark and steady, reflecting the firelight. There was something in the look he gave her, a recognition, a quiet acknowledgement of shared vulnerability that made her heart beat faster. He didn't speak again, but the silence between them was not empty. It was charged, alive, filled with unspoken understanding. One hand over hers, their fingers brushing occasionally, the faint warmth of his body radiating across the small space separating them. It was more than comfort. It was connection. The fire flickered, sending a soft glow across his features. Evelyn noted the lines of his face, the way the light softened the rugged edges, the shadows that deepened the intensity of his gaze. There was a tenderness there, hidden beneath years of isolation and stoicism that no one else had seen, or perhaps no one else had been allowed to see. And now she was seeing it. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax fully against the blanket, letting the warmth from him and the fire seep in. It was a rare sensation, this letting go, this acknowledgement that someone else's presence could ease her burdens. And she realized that the night, the storm, the rescue, the fire, the quiet conversations had built something fragile and delicate, but undeniable: trust. A thread connecting her to him in ways she could not yet articulate. Chayton finally withdrew his hand slowly, but not completely. His fingers lingered near hers, a silent promise that he would remain close, that he would not vanish into the shadows of wealth and distance that had defined him for so long. Evelyn's heart thumped in her chest, not from fear, but from awareness. The awareness that something significant had shifted in the quiet of this cabin, something she could neither ignore nor easily explain. The fire crackled again, soft and steady, and outside the walls of the cabin, the storm continued its relentless dance. But inside, Evelyn felt a rare warmth, one that went beyond blankets and tea, one that carried the promise of something deeper, a touch that meant more thaw. The first light of dawn filtered through the frost-lined cabin windows, soft and pale, painting the room in muted shades of gold and silver. The storm had finally relented, leaving the snow outside untouched and glistening, as if the world itself had been purified overnight. Inside, the cabin was still warm, the fire now a gentle glow. And Evelyn stirred beneath the layers of blankets, slowly waking to a day she had not expected to survive. She blinked against the soft light, her gaze falling on Chayton Silverhawk, who sat near the hearth, quietly tending the remnants of the fire. His profile was serene in the morning glow, the harsh lines of his face softened by the overnight warmth and rest. Evelyn's chest tightened with a mixture of awe and gratitude. She had been rescued from the storm, yes, but the night had offered something far more rare: trust. She felt the deep significance of having shared hours in silence, warmth, and conversation with a man she had admired from afar but never truly known. Chayton noticed her stirring and glanced over, eyes dark, calm, and steady. He gave a small nod, acknowledging her without breaking the fragile cocoon of peace they had created. Evelyn, still wrapped in blankets, offered a tentative smile, one that was shy but genuine. He returned it, faint, almost hesitant, as if unsure whether the connection forged in the firelit night could survive the light of day. The silence that followed was gentle, comfortable, and Evelyn realized with a subtle thrill that neither of them wanted to break it. But the moment carried weight, the kind of weight that comes from nights of survival, of vulnerability shared, and of walls gently falling. Chayton cleared his throat softly. "The storm is over," he said, voice low, almost conversational, yet carrying a hint of something more, concern perhaps, or the acknowledgement of what had passed between them. "You're safe, warm, alive." "Yes," Evelyn whispered, her words barely audible, yet each one imbued with gratitude. "Thanks to you." His eyes lingered on hers longer than necessary, a quiet intensity that unsettled and intrigued her all at once. Chayton Silverhawk, the man the town called distant and untouchable, was no longer untouchable to her, not in that cabin, not after the night they had spent together. His guard, which had seemed impenetrable, showed the first cracks. A vulnerability, subtle but unmistakable, had slipped through. I should get going soon," Evelyn said softly, almost to fill the space, almost as a way to prepare herself for leaving the safety of the cabin and the rare warmth of his presence. "I don't want to impose any longer." "You're not imposing," he replied immediately, a low edge of insistence in his voice. He shifted slightly, leaning forward, placing a careful distance between them that was both protective and intimate. "You're welcome here. Anytime." His words hung in the morning air, simple yet charged with meaning. Evelyn's fingers brushed the edge of the blanket. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," he said softly. His tone was gentle, yet in his eyes she read a sincerity that caught her off guard. For a man so accustomed to isolation, to keeping his life private and controlled, the admission was more revealing than any words could convey. It was a silent confession. She mattered. More than she had anticipated. More than he would likely admit aloud. The moment stretched between them, fragile and powerful. Evelyn felt an unexpected courage rise within her, a desire to speak what she hadn't dared to before. "Chayton, last night, it meant more than I can explain. You saved me. But it was more than that. You made me feel safe, like someone finally saw me." His lips pressed into a faint line, the guarded mask he normally wore softening. "And you made me see myself," he admitted quietly, almost reluctantly. "I've spent so long keeping people out, keeping the world at a distance. Last night, I realized I don't want to do that anymore." "Not with you?" Evelyn's heart thudded, a mixture of surprise, relief, and burgeoning emotion. The billionaire, the stoic, reserved Chayton Silverhawk, he was opening a part of himself she hadn't expected to see. And in that opening, in the vulnerability of shared warmth and trust, a bond had formed, a connection neither of them could ignore. The fire flickered between them. The cabin still cocooned in a rare tranquility. Outside, the snow glistened, untouched and pristine. Inside, two people, one a teacher. When a billionaire Apache found that the storm had not only brought rescue but revelation. The night had changed everything, and dawn now illuminated the first fragile threads of something neither could deny: hope, connection, and the possibility of more. Chayton's gaze lingered, a question unspoken in the depth of his eyes. Would she stay in this life he had built, in the warmth and honesty of his world? Evelyn met his eyes steadily, and though neither spoke, the unspoken answer carried the weight of promise. The storm had passed, but the changes it had brought, the connection, the trust, the stirrings of something deeper, were only just beginning. By mid-morning, the sun had risen fully, spilling soft, golden light across the pristine snow outside the cabin. The storm that had threatened to engulf Evelyn's life only hours before was now a quiet memory, leaving the world calm, sparkling, and untouched. Inside, the cabin felt even warmer, filled with the lingering intimacy of a night spent in shared vulnerability and quiet connection. Evelyn sat by the hearth, wrapped in the same thick blanket, sipping the last of her tea. She watched Chayton Silverhawk move with easy, practiced efficiency, gathering tools to ensure the fire would remain strong, stacking wood neatly by the hearth, and tending to small chores as if the cabin itself were a living thing deserving of attention. Yet she noticed the subtle ways he included her in his movements, his glance checking that she was comfortable, the occasional reach to adjust her blanket, the gentle consideration in his every motion. The events of the night played in her mind. She remembered the storm, the cold that had nearly claimed her, and the strength and decisiveness of the man who had rescued her. But more than that, she remembered the warmth of the fire, the quiet conversations, and the moments of intimacy that had nothing to do with romance yet everything to do with trust. The careful touch of his hand over hers, the shared stories of heritage and life, and the silence that had spoken louder than words ever could, all of it had changed something inside her. Chayton finally turned toward her, his dark eyes soft in the morning light. "The roads are cleared enough," he said quietly. "You can get back to town safely." Evelyn nodded, her stomach twisting with a mixture of gratitude and regret. "Thank you for everything," she said, her voice catching. "I don't think I can ever repay you." He shook his head slightly, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You don't need to. Seeing you safe is enough." His gaze lingered on her, steady, unflinching, yet gentle. "But I hope this isn't the last time we see each other." Her heart skipped. She realized that, in all her years on the reservation, she had never felt an invitation so quiet and powerful. She had always lived a careful, measured life, but this was different. She had met someone who didn't just see her. He recognized her worth, her courage, her vulnerability, and in return, she had seen him. The man behind the wealth, the reputation, the solitary existence. "I don't want it to be," she admitted softly, a smile breaking across her face. "Not if you don't." Chayton's expression softened, and for the first time, the carefully constructed walls he had maintained for years seemed to crumble just a little. He moved closer, offering a hand, not commanding, not insisting, but extending an invitation for trust, for connection. Evelyn took it without hesitation, feeling the warmth of his grip and the steady reassurance it carried. For a moment, they stood together in the quiet glow of the cabin. Two lives unexpectedly intertwined by a storm, a rescue, and a night that neither would ever forget. Outside, the snow glittered in the morning sun, untouched and pure, like the promise of something new. "You've got quite the fire in you," Chayton said softly, eyes locking with hers. "Not just from the storm. From here?" He gestured to the cabin, to the warmth, to the safety, and to the courage she had shown. "I think I've been reminded of something I forgot." Evelyn tilted her head, curious. "That life. Connection, trust. It's worth opening up for," he admitted quietly, his voice low and sincere. "Even for someone like me." She felt a warmth blossom in her chest, not from blankets or fire, but from understanding and recognition. "I'm glad you remembered," she said, her voice soft, but certain. Chayton offered a small nod, then gestured toward the snow-covered landscape beyond the cabin. "Come on. I'll get you safely back to town. But I hope this is just the beginning." Evelyn followed him to the door, the snow sparkling like diamonds in the morning light. She paused, taking a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill her lungs and the lingering warmth of the cabin settle in her heart. The storm had taken her to the brink, but it had also brought her to him. And somehow, against the odds, she realized that everything had changed. The ride back to town was quiet, comfortable, and unhurried. Evelyn leaned slightly against him, the same way she had leaned that night by the fire, and for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what life could be like beyond survival, beyond caution, beyond the boundaries she had always set. When they finally reached the edge of town, Chayton stopped, looking at her with a soft, almost hesitant smile. "This isn't the end," he said. Evelyn smiled back, feeling a profound sea.